Broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to this end of week edition of WilmsFront on this Friday the 23rd of October 2020. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive channels as well as the Unshackled's Facebook page, and of course as always on the Entropy Enhanced software, which I put the link into the live chat. It is 7 p.m. here in still formerly lockdown Melbourne, where it is of course the grand final eve public holiday, but the grand final AFL is taking place at the Gabba in Brisbane tomorrow night with Richmond versus Geelong. Two Victorian teams playing the grand final in Brisbane, which of course summarises what we've lost here in Melbourne this 2020. Another anti-lockdown protest was held at the Shrine of Remembrance this afternoon, but Victoria Police largely stood back with only a few arrests. Police were not in riot gear or with shields this time, only on horseback. The fake news media has been trying to hype up the few clashes between protesters and police during the day and made some sensational headlines and some sensational highlights reels. It was a hugely different environment to that of the first Freedom Day protest on September 5 with the protesters today. They were able to march all throughout the city and have ended up in South Melbourne. We had one new case today of coronavirus, which is linked to an Islamic school cluster in Melbourne's north. We have another easing of restrictions to be announced on Sunday based on the current case numbers this week, and with only 100 active cases, no one in intensive care, there is no justification for any aspect of the lockdown, the mask mandate, business closures and travel restrictions to continue. Premier Dan Andrews has told us we will have a COVID normal and COVID safe summer. This new normal is a phrase we've heard countless political leaders and media outlets repeat about our future post-COVID. Most of us prefer the old normal, but there is an alternative, better normal, which humanity can choose post the coronavirus and the lockdowns. 2020 has seen more people wake up to the globalist agenda more than ever before. I've met countless activists throughout the year, featured them on this show. Some are brand new activists, some have been quietly working away for many years before and have seen their reach expand and their vision begin to come to fruition. My guest tonight is Sacha Stone, who is a founder of the New Earth Project, which describes itself as an open platform to unite humanity in ushering in a new era of planetary well-being, peace and prosperity. The project creates blueprints for sustainable, sovereign and self-determining communities, headquartered out of its Akasha NewEarth Haven in Bali. Sacha is a former rock musician and artist who grew up in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe throughout the War of Independence. He established humankind in 1999 and has been in the NGO and IGO sectors as an outspoken advocate of human rights and natural justice. He's founded the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, which launched in Westminster Central Hall in London on the 800th anniversary of the signing of the Magna Carta in 2015. Sacha is also the founder of the World Health Sovereign Summit, which has brought together the world's leading advocates in this area: Robert Kennedy Jr., Del Bigtree, Gia Wood-Griffin, Professor Dolores Cahill, Dr. Christine Northrup, Marla Maples, Charlene Bollinger, Dr. Rashid Bhattar, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Andrew Wakefield, and Dr. David Martin. And it's my pleasure to welcome Sacha to the show.
Nice to meet you, Tim, and thank you for that introduction.
Yes, well, you're over there in Bali. I'm not sure what the weather's like at the moment. It used to be in the old normal popular holiday spot for a lot of Australians, but we're not allowed to leave Australia under our Biosecurity Act.
Yes, indeed. And some people on the island are happy to see the end of tourism, and others are obviously devastated by it. So it's kind of split the island. But yeah, indeed, this is a place which normally you hear the dulcet Antipodean tones in the air, and we're not hearing them at the moment. So yeah, missing you guys. What can I say?
Well, in Melbourne today, given that it's grand final eve, in normal times we'd have the grand final parade up our Swanson Street. That there'd be the two teams with the Premiership Cup, but still technically under lockdown. But I know that you've heard a lot about what's been happening in Melbourne, and our Premier Dan Andrews. But yes, he has to loosen up. There's no justification, it seems, for his power trip to continue.
I don't know why you're being so polite. The man is a goddamn moron, a sociopath. He's in breach of his oath. He's a fucking troglodyte who needs to be dealt with a big stick. And there's only two words that really make sense for anyone in Australia, and especially Melbourne right now, and that's civil disobedience. And there's two other words that you need to be aware of. One's called sedition, and the other one's treason, okay? Because that's essentially what's taking place. When publicly elected sadomasochists like Dan Andrews find their way into the portals of power because they've been well oiled by their lobby groups and whoever the hell are behind the salamander class of Politico, when they find themselves in office, they're required to do one thing and one thing alone, which is to serve according to their mandate, their remit. Okay, that's enshrined, encoded, that's constitutional, that is irrevocable. And when you find that people like him are abrogating, derogating, breaching, defiling not just their oath, but every natural law and common law and constitutional law, you guys have a very serious problem. Now, what men in Australia need to do, and especially men in Melbourne need to do, and lean in closely to what I have to say. Take a look at Mr. Dan Andrews. Take a good look at the man's psychometry. Look at his face. Look at his haircut. Look at his fashion sense. Listen to his voice, the tone of his voice. Look at the way he articulates his eyebrows and his face when he speaks. And ask yourself a question. When he comes out with such venal shit that he comes out with, how would you deal with him in the schoolyard or behind the bicycle shed? That's how you should see power. That's how you should be looking at power. And that's how you, power inverted commas. And that's how you should be speaking truth to power. Because that man is a diabolical creature. He does not belong in office. He does not belong where he is. Somehow you've been asleep at the wheel, guys, in Australia for too long. You've allowed that salamander class to come in. And I apply the same metric to Scott Morrison. Again, sedition is sedition. Treason is treason. It happens to be the highest crime known to man, okay? And what you're going to find when the audit is done, not so much in Australia, but in all parts of the world, when the audit is done, we're going to be counting up the toll of how many people died as a result of the breaches of oath of these people. There will be Nuremberg-type trials. I don't know that Australia is going to feature very much in the front row there, and that's because there seems to be a lot of obedience to tyranny in Australia, a lot of acquiescence. I salute you, Tim. I salute Max Egan. I salute Pete Evans. I salute Paul Sales. I salute all the activists in Australia. But I'll tell you what, roundabout now, I am not saluting the common man. You guys are obeying tyranny.
That was a well delivered, succinct summary of what we're going through here in Victoria and Australia at large. I know that, I'll just give you an example of that obedience. As soon as Dan Andrews decreed that suddenly masks worked against the coronavirus, then everyone started wearing them, and they're continuing to wear them because Dan's decreed it. He'll get Victoria Police to fine you $200, and he's now got, as I describe it, a mask fetish. And
yes.
But the day that he says they're not mandatory anymore, people will stop wearing them, which is this obedience that you were talking about. And Australians, well, they have this reputation of being laid back, but it's more of another way you could look at it is that Australians have been very passive. They put up with a lot of government intrusion And they also are willing to, well, there's that old saying, the government provides us with a lot, but they can also take everything away as well.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the police. Let's not refer to those who are enforcing these rogue statutes, which themselves are not laws. So be clear, huge distinction between a law and a statute, a code, a provision, a regulation, the kind of shit dreamt up by Scott Morrison and Dan Andrews under cover of law. They are not laws. Those are statutes, and they could and should be ignored by living men and women of the living soil, where they cause harm against right to life, which is the foundation stone of all law. And when you're being asked to mask yourself up and deplete yourself against oxygen, and deplete your kids against their oxygen intake, and bring about a systemic failure of the immune system, that is called harming right to life. So you've just fucked up their government. Police, as far as the police are concerned, why are you referring to them as police? They're not police. They're cashiers and clerks. That's what they're doing. They are ATM machines. They are fulfilling the function of a cashier. They are also in breach and defilement of their oath. I speak to senior ranking police in Australia who've called me, senior ranking guys, to try and also get advice on how to navigate through this shit storm. Because it is such a conundrum, such a confluence of witchery and evil that is taking place in the portals of government. But again, I suggest you don't refer to these thugs in costume as police, the ones who are supporting the rogue statutes. There are good police there, trust me, really good ones. But the really good ones are the ones who are standing on their conscience and will take the knee and will always obey the dictate of their conscience and the oath and the constitution that they took. The oath that they took is the standard.
Feel free to correct me anytime throughout the show if you think I'm being too polite. But in terms of dictator Dan, myself and a lot of other activists here in Melbourne, we've been trying to bring it to people's attention ever since this guy took office in 2014. We've known since then what deep down what a nasty, vindictive control freak he is. But obviously where you are in Bali with the new Earth Project, obviously 2020 has turned the world upside down, empowered the globalists, the totalitarians. Did you see this type of event coming, whether in the form of a pandemic or some sort of crisis where they'd be able to turn nearly every nation into a police state and implement this, global contact tracing, home imprisonments? It's because you've been in this field of activism for over 20 years.
Well, it's black magic that's being perpetrated, spellbinding, dream spell, and black magic, and we could go into those subjects at great length, and I'd love to do that at some time. But I was endorsing over 10 years ago Colonel Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi, who everyone was demonizing at the time. And I got very strongly behind that man. He was the man who stood on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly and said, and I'm quoting because I'm reading it here, they will create the viruses themselves and sell you the antidotes. Thereafter, they will pretend to take time to find the solution when they already have it. He knew that years before he was murdered by the United States rogue Clinton, Obama, Bush crime cartel. So that was one African leader trying to call it out on the floor of the General Assembly of the United Nations, the most powerful podium on the face of the earth. Who was listening to him? No one was listening. I'm just a humble activist, possibly not so humble. And I've been saying it for over 15 years. Yes, I've been writing white papers and essays, and I was a director general in the IGO sector in the UN for a while until I lost my stomach for it. I never took coin from them. But I went in believing I could shake things up in the basement, how wrong I was. I understand how governance works and how multilateral governance works. I understand how the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the Bank of International Settlements, World Bank, and the IMF are the utility of Satan as he enforces through this Babylonian edifice of the UN, all countries of the world to roll back and fall into line with these evil protocols connected to things like glyphosates in the food supply, the fluoride in the water, municipal water supply, 5G implementation around the world, when we know exactly what it's going to be doing to all biological life forms. So that kind of insanity is what prevails because of the entire apparatus of so-called government that we've got today, all of which is Saturnian, satanic, Luciferian, and utterly lawless. So all that we should be doing is having one conversation, which is about that new earth, not my new earth, not my vision of the new earth. My vision of a new earth is what you see. You see a man living in the Southeast Asian archipelago in my own lawless way, but conducting myself with right action, pure truth, standing in honor, causing no harm, loss, or injury to other living souls. So that's how you do it. That's how we manifest and engineer a new paradigm. But we have to remove our attention from this godless construct called government and stop for a moment, everyone, and think, what is it in you, in us, your family, your community, your society, your culture, your nation? What is it in you that feels that you need to be governed by sociopathy, by insane racketeering criminal cartels masquerading as governments? What is it in us that feels the need to put that out into the field and invite that kind of a tyranny and oppression and repression and suppression and command and control of our lives? Right. The minute you have one single moment with that thought in lucidity, you see the insanity of the proposition, and then you step away from it. And what happens then? Then the flame of sovereignty ignites. Then your consciousness awakens. And then you start to activate a different set of values, morality in your own life. And that's really what the New Earth is. What we've been architecting is essentially a platform upon which we can agree by consensus that consciousness, conscience in consciousness in action, conscience as a navigation, and a right action are all we need to manifest heaven on earth, or patterns of perfection in this world. But we must remove our attention and our coin from government and from perpetuating this insane Atlantean apparatus. That's what you're going to get, baby. You're going to get a sadomasochistic, perverse intellect like Dan Andrews or Scott Morrison, leering at you through the screen or from the podium in their little fucking twangy accents, telling you, beautiful people, how you're going to lie, how you're going to walk around your streets, when you're going to walk out in the streets, when you can take oxygen and vitamin D from the sun and when you cannot. It cannot get worse than this.
Well, the worst place to be at a time like this is, well, in Melbourne, is cramped in the inner city. And to answer your question before, the reason why people are obeying is because conditioning, divide and conquer. There's been, I think the state of Victoria had the most calls to the government snitch line about people breaking restrictions more than any other state and territory. I'm in the outer southeast of Melbourne, so it's not as cramped here as it would be in the inner cities. But this is what's happened in 2020. The breakdown in trust. Australia was the first country to have that ridiculous toilet paper panic with people assaulting each other in the supermarkets.
Carry on. Sorry about that.
And so obviously, as I said before, Australians have been very passive, conditioned, but certainly 2020 has been a wake-up call for many. The technology that we're communicating on, it can be a bad thing, but also a good thing if it's used to its greatest strength. And certainly there's going to be a huge exodus from not just Melbourne, but the cities as well. The natural environment we've missed so much because we've been told to stay indoors, and well, when you go outside you're not allowed to breathe oxygen with the masks. Definitely what I like about the New Earth Project is that we combine the best of the natural world and also what humankind has built over the existence of the earth, and use it for good.
Well, and all the NewEarth stands for is a return to natural law and the dispensation of natural justice and right action in your life, the fractality of nature, when you don't screw with it, with bad imagining, with bad dreaming, with bad thinking, and then try to impose supremacy and manipulation and control over the rivers, over the lakes, over the oceans, over the soil. When you try and homogenize farming into a monoculture, you entirely destroy the microbial flora and fauna within the soil, and that's it. You set yourself back 1,000 years. You know, there's so many ways that we've been defiling natural law as a so-called evolving civilization. And yes, you're right. It's a return to that natural state of being that is the great invitation upon us at this time. How many people in Australia have the courage to be able to step away from the Ponzi scheme of an engineered financial system with mortgages and debt and banking and wanking and all the nonsense that comes, the paraphernalia of a modern living in a city in the modern day? How many people have the courage and the conviction and the conscience and the brevity of imagination to be able to step away from that orchestration of chaos in your life, which is city living and all the statutes and regulations that go with it, and then move to the soil? Remains to be seen. Certainly what your government is trying to do under a cover of Corona COVID-19, which, don't forget, is a cover story for Agenda 21, Agenda 30, all that's going on. This is the biggest land grab in the history of our world. That's what's going on. They're trying to separate you from your reason. They've done division and conquest. Divide and conquest has happened for thousands of years. They deployed that through the arcane priesthoods and the arcane kings and principalities of old. And that brought us to where we are today. That doesn't work anymore. Good humans are awakening. So we don't get so easily led into fundamentalist this or fundamentalist that. We're all beginning to realize it's a rigged game. It's a dialectic. So what they're doing now is trying to divide us from our reason, from our sanity, and from our consciousness. And that is where these bizarre, satanic dream spells, black magic, shrouds of witchery that are being cast upon us by the Scott Morrisons and the Dan Andrews of this world, who themselves are small-decked functionaries of the Sabbatean class that owns and controls Corporation Australia. And be sure you are a privately registered corporation. And you people, whoever you are in Australia, who is registered at birth to the state, you're registered to the Crown of England. You are the chattel of Queen Elizabeth II. You are owned by the Black Papacy that in turn owns the Vatican complex, that owns the Crown of England. If you care to unplug from your wage slavery for long enough and do a little bit of the real work, the real graft in learning about true history, the genesis of the banking system, the genesis of your godless government, the genesis of the multilateral governments like the United Nations, the League of Nations, the Cecil John Rhodes round tables going back to the Victorian era. All of that stuff is proof positive of the fact of the matter that you are a sacrificial lamb. You offer your life force up for harvest. You offer your coin unto Caesar through your taxes, and through all the penalties that you pay, you offer up your conscience and your consciousness. And that's what gets you trapped into this space. And yes, Australia's had it too good for too long, in a sense, and so has Canada. And so in a sense is the United Kingdom. And that is why the UK, Canada, and Australia are the three countries in the Western world that in a sense are suffering the most right now, because you guys have been fully weaponized by cult programming, by radio, television, billboards, the Radio Times, everything that you hear on the godless airwaves, all the icons and totems and images that proliferate and pornographicize your reality hologram are gifted to you by the Sabbatean class. And we've been weaponized. The Five Eyes, the intelligence infrastructure of the world is contained essentially by the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States of America. Those five countries are the ones that are the tip of the spear of the bedevilment of humanity through the intelligence network, through the metadata surveillance, through the tracking and tracing and all of that stuff. And what they're telling us that they're going to do is just a very shallow expression of what they've got in the wings in terms of endogenously modifying your RNA and being able to activate through the 5G superstructure the dialing in to the frequency of your RNA, DNA signature, you, Tim Wilms, and being able to bring about catastrophic failure of your microbiome, of your immune system, give you a heart attack on the spot. These are technologies which are extant. They've been developed to fulmination and they're ready to be deployed.
Funny you mentioned that. Dan Andrews in his daily press conferences where he waffles on about various things. He talked about a device that not only can track your movements but track your health vitals as well. He lets a lot slip with his. Well, they go for about an hour and a half every day. His press briefings. But Australia as a whole, we're a vast land. It's a beautiful land, but we're 80% of the population is all crammed into our major cities. It's also a hard land as well. It took the settlers in Australia when the British first came to tame the land, make the crops grow. But we saw last summer with the bushfires what happens when the current people in power don't tame the land. We had so much bushfires nationwide, and You've said a lot about Scott Morrison. He is the one who is enabling the states to close our state borders, which is a violation of the Constitution, and also has been the number one cheerleader of the global vaccine, locked in 2 vaccine deals. They'll be free and voluntary in name, but of course the manufacturers are exempt from liability. And also the new passenger declaration cards, well, they're going to be digitalized and including a digital vaccination ID. So Australia's at the forefront of the new normal and
we're playing into it.
Contact tracing. Yes,
we're playing into it by even speaking about it. There is not going to be any mandatory vaccinations, not in Australia, nowhere. What they will do is make it as impossible for you to cross the road, much less get a job or get on an airplane or a train without having one of them. They'll try that for a while. It'll fail. It will not see the day. Trust me on this. It will not see the day. We are playing into this energetically, psycho-intellectually, by projecting our attention onto these godless and gormless little edicts coming out of the gormless face of Dan Andrews or Scott Morrison. Like I said, this is a salamander-class human being. They are bereft of consciousness. They are bereft of conscience. They are bereft of animus, of creative imagination. These creatures are a perfect troglodyte class. That's what they are. Refer to them as salamanders because that's what they are. Again, I ask you, how would you deal with one of these characters if they tried to mug your child behind the bike shed? How would you deal with them? Right, they're trying to mug your children, okay? Get that in your head. They're trying to mug you, your wives, your women folk, and your children. So get angry, get pissed off, okay? Drop your balls, get out your front door. Men, I'm appealing to men here. Get with this, man. We've been cult programmed into being goddamn football hooligans. So the only time you can get angry is when your fucking football team loses score. This is when you're supposed to find fire in your belly, fire in your eyes, and kick your front door down. Move out. Go in. Reclaim your land, your soil, your life, your vocation, and the health and the welfare of your families. So let's not pay attention to the bullshit little statutes that these creatures are dribbling out of the side of their mouths. It's of no consequence what Scott says or Dan says. They're performing their function as mandarins, troglodytes. What matters, Tim, is what you and I say. How we respond to that. That's what matters. That's the only thing that matters.
Sorry, the connection went for a moment. Maybe you're speaking too much truth, but
I'm not afraid of these creatures. I've sat down and dined with hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that, hundreds in the last 21 years of kings, presidents, prime ministers, leaders. I know what a good leader is. I've got tremendous respect for good religious leaders, good political leaders, good police leaders, good academic leaders, good leaders of industry, good bankers. There are some good bankers out there, believe it or not. I've got a great deal of time for good fellows, good men, good women of the soil. But I despise Luciferians and Saturnian critters like the ones we're dealing with in Australia. And again, I say, it is not what they say. I don't care what Scott dribbles out of his mouth or Dan says. I don't care about these. These are donuts to me. They don't exist. They are witless, non-ensouled beings. What matters, they are acting as triggers, catalysts for you and me to awaken within the dream spell. The question remains, are we awakening within the dream spell? If you do a soul frequency reading on a Dan Andrews or a Scott Morrison, you'll find that they're scarcely ensouled. They don't have animals moving through them. They are not fully souled beings, so don't worry about what they say. They're just functionaries. How are we responding to the insane edicts coming out of this class of salamander? That must be the question we ask ourselves, Tim. Otherwise, it's never going to move into consciousness in action. It'll only be consciousness sitting inside a prison cell having a cup of tea. We don't want to be having a tea party in a prison cell. We want to be running around the meadows. We want to be making wild, passionate, crazy love with each other. We want to be making music and painting the sky with our imagination. That's what we're born to do, not to be goddamn wage slaves, answering to Mr. Scott Morrison, Mr. Dan Andrews.
You've said repeatedly now about how would you handle Dan Andrews if he was just an ordinary person on the street, and you've reminded me of the old libertarian comparison. What's the difference between government and organized crime? Because the government, they do things that you wouldn't tolerate from a private citizen or private company. And the worst thing about government is that they can exempt themselves from their own laws. Here in Victoria, for example, we've got industrial manslaughter laws. There's a push to have the Andrews government prosecuted for how they mismanaged the second wave. But of course, they've always got the option to exempt themselves from their own laws. This is what is the unjust nature of government and those that they choose to patronize as well.
Well, it's an important point you raise, is the distinction between natural law and man-made law, or natural law and statutory law, which is man-made law. So I'll briefly just give you that distinction. In natural law is based upon principles and truth which are intrinsic to creation, okay, and that are self-realizing and self-reflecting and intrinsic and innate, inherent in everything that is natural, that is non-synthetic. Natural law is harmonized with and due to knowledge and understanding, okay? So the assimilation, it's a sensory thing, psionic intelligence. You feel it, you know it to be thus, and therefore it becomes the dictate of conscience and of consciousness. Natural law is universal. It exists and applies anywhere in the universe, regardless of location, okay? Very important. And finally, natural law is eternal, immutable. It exists and applies for as long as the universe exists and cannot be changed. Now, man's law, statutory law, Dan Andrews' law and Scott Morrison's law is statutory law. They make that shit up as they go along, basically. That's what it means. It means that supremacy wins, witchery wins, spellbinding wins, deception wins, the serpent wins, okay? The apocryphal snake in the garden wins. And man's law, statutory law, is based upon dogmatic belief, i.e. cult programming, constructs of the mind. It's complied with because we are afraid of punishment. We comply, we obey, we acquiesce to statutory law because we are afraid of the outcome. That is an abomination in itself. A statutory law differs with location based upon the whim of the legislators. Moral relativism. Okay, it's going to be different in South Sudan as it is in Canada or in Western Australia. Okay, it is also, statutory law also changes with time based upon the whim of legislators. So as you said, they just change it and it shapeshifts. So that's the distinction between natural law and statutory law, which is why the coronation event, the COVID-19 coronation event of our madness, our insanity as a civilization, is the greatest gift being given to ourselves, by our unconscious collective oversoul, because it is going to now force us, each of us listening to this, each of us are going to be forced to learn the distinction between God's law and man's law in that sense, and decide which side of the line, not just of history you wouldn't want to stand, but of survival. Because if you abrogate your soul to the extent that the Scott Morrisons, the Dan Andrews, and all the other functionaries and cashiers of governments around the world are defiling natural law and God's law, these people are damning themselves at the soul level, because the executive pen that comes out of a Scott Morrison or a Donald Trump, fortunately Trump happens to be the right stuff, but a commander-in-chief, a president, a prime minister, people at that level, a governor, the flick of their executive pen, the wet ink signature, causes people to die the next day. So you tell people to mask up, and all of a sudden 120 million people have masked up. You've depleted the oxygen intake and the oxygenation of the brain by 20% of 120 million people. That's something measurable on a chart to show how the immune system of those people starts to collapse systemically. And that brings about diabetes and heart attack and all sorts of things. It's literally an audit of culling that we're going to be seeing coming out the back end of this. So that's the distinction between God's law and man's law. You decide which you choose to follow.
Yeah, there's hardly any consideration at the moment for the current and future lockdown death toll and coercive death toll as well. One of my people in the live chat, Correct Show, wants you to explain to the audience a bit more about the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. And one of the things that it's done, which is it has also gained the issue of human trafficking and child sex abuse. It's gained more this secret. Well, it even though there is more discussion about it, there's still a lot of this abhorrent practice going on. It's getting more and more exposure. But just talk about the work of the
Sure.
tribunal.
Well, I founded it in 2015, and we did a ceremonial seating in London and ratified the treaty in Westminster the following day. That was on the 800th anniversary of the signing of Magna Carta, which was when the good barons of the land were joined by the good people of the soil 805 years ago now, to move against the king. And at that time, create a reset and a return, in a sense, to common law. At least that was the noble objective of Magna Carta. And then what we've seen in the last 800 years is an incremental, by stealth, return to a stealing of the land, the forests, the mountains, the oceans from the people of the soil. And we've been patriated into, or sequestered into, city grids, urban landscapes, and we've all but been forced off the land through the banking system, which is all part of a coercion tactic, a generational coercion tactic to steal our farmlands, steal our forests, and steal our homes, so that only the bank wins, only the bank owns everything. So we set up the International Tribunal for Natural Justice as the antidote to all the statutory bullshit that's masquerading as the juridical processes and the judicious processes around the world. And we've been engaged in a number of key missions, the most important one really being that Judicial Commission of Inquiry into human trafficking and child sex abuse, which we launched in Westminster again in 2018, and which had a demonstrable effect on unmasking the Vatican complex and the generational pedophilia and ritual satanic abuse that's been going on all around the world, largely protected by the churches, which is just part of the kind of cult programming cover story. But that work is ongoing. Frankly, we expected that we would have wrapped up that particular commission last year, but it's still ongoing, and we're now looking to wrap it up probably in the first quarter of next year, I imagine, or middle of next year. One imagines that we might have reached some form of summation or declaration in the court. But the more we've looked into the testimonies, the more we've gone in and done hearings and seatings into human trafficking and child sex abuse, the more we're seeing. So right now, we're being trafficked. Humans who are being forced to stay in their homes and are not allowed to move from point A to point B is by definition human trafficking. So human trafficking now is at a more serious, and the child abuse that's happening in foster homes, in care homes, and in also families that are perversely connected to satanic abuse and ritual pedophilia. All of that is getting endemically worse as well, because the kids are being forced inside and not even allowed to run in the fields. So we're just seeing an exponential compression of that stuff. But at the same time, by the grace of God, and perhaps by the grace of the executive pen of one Donald J. Trump, we have seen also the mask being torn off in the last 3 years of ritual satanic abuse, pedophilia, human trafficking. So that game is being exposed. I just did a 2-hour broadcast with the special ops guy at the front of this in the United States, Craig Sawyer, recently, and learned a lot from him about that. And I have spoken to many others involved in the retrievals that are going on all around the world, in Australia as well. Australia is no exception. You've been a hive and a hotbed of Satanism. You still are a hive and a hotbed of human trafficking and child abuse, child sex abuse, and ritual satanic abuse. And that's before we even speak to Pine Gap and what's been going on in the military-industrial, non-terrestrial ET basement, which is a very substantial story, which you're going to be hearing in Australia a great deal more about next year.
Well, it's only hit the mass media recently, elite child sex rings. We saw in the last 24 hours that more of Ghislaine Maxwell's depositions were released, even though the more and more documents get released of her and Jeffrey Epstein's child sex trafficking ring. There isn't really anything more that really comes out that really exposes who all the interconnected people are. It's always a bit more, but it feels like that we're never going to get to the truth is always going to evade us. I mean, she's still alive at present, but we know what happened with Jeffrey Epstein, and there's also been more focus on, well, it's now in plain sight what goes on, what has been going on in Hollywood for many years with the child star sex trafficking.
Well, that's in a sense the more innocuous side of it. The trafficking and sex abuse leveled against those blessed Hollywood kids, and I've known a few of them, and to this day still do, and I'm in touch with some of them. It is horrendous. It's generational. It's long-standing, but it's in a sense it's the blunt side of the knife. It's not the sharp side of the knife. That they are at least well fed and well kept in the main. A few have been sacrificed as part of public notice, essentially, to other Satanists to get back in line. But in the main, I'd say that they're the lucky ones, if there can be such a thing. But the other side of it is beyond. I mean, what is going to emerge, I think you'll find from the Hunter Biden revelations and his, I've seen some of the images that were sent across to us yesterday. And if those prove to be true, it's taking it to a whole new level. And what's going to emerge from the Biden family, I mean, anyone who knows about the generational satanic families and Luciferian families and Illuminati, so-called Illuminati and fringe Illuminati dynasties, knows exactly who the Bidens are, and knows exactly where the Clintons issue from, knows exactly where Obama issues from and what he was doing in the back of limousines back in the 1980s before he was fast-tracked as a candidate to be a black president. And the dynasty of the Bush family, connected to the Crown of England and the House of Saud in the Middle East, the Gulf. And how those crime families have been joined at the hip for many, many, many generations. So yes, it's a hotbed. Once you get into this subject, it becomes very, very dark, very entangled. But again, I think it's really, we should be happy about the fact, Tim, that the revelations are happening today. You say that we all know what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. I'll beg to differ. We absolutely categorically do not know what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. I will wager the man is alive and well and living on a U.S. military base a few kilometers outside of Hamburg, Germany. But time will tell. I know I've spoken to senior ranking police detectives who were involved themselves in sequestering top high-level diplomats and political figures and billionaires from prison cells when they were purportedly gone to prison for crimes, but they just get ushered out the back door, put on helicopters, and taken and spend their term in prison on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and that can go on for 10 years, just so you know. So no, we don't know what happened to Jeffrey Epstein, and we're unlikely.
We just know that he didn't kill himself. That's what I was implying.
That much we know. And as far as Ghislaine Maxwell is concerned, I would suggest that she's also the blunt edge of the knife of truth and disclosure. I don't think that Ghislaine Maxwell is a uniquely important element. Yes, her father was Mossad. Yes, she by extension is Mossad. Yes, Jeffrey Epstein was Mossad. Yes, Epstein Island and Lolita Express was a honey trap for political figures and celebrities. I mean, some of our people that we love went to that island. You know, when you look at Dr. Stephen Hawking, the astrophysicist, well, even he in his wheelchair went to on the Lolita Express. You know, where does it end? Steven Tyler of Aerosmith, who's one of the greatest rock gods and icons of bohemian consciousness on the planet. Was he involved in shenanigans with schoolgirls? I very much doubt it. I don't think for a second that everyone who went on Lolita Express were getting involved in that stuff or going to parties on Epstein's Island. There was a long period of time when Jeffrey Epstein was simply recognized as being, a quasi hedge fund manager, billionaire, playboy, fun guy to hang out with, throwing fantastic parties. People tend to go to fantastic parties when they're invited, So it's not that everyone connected to Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein were embroiled in sodomizing babies. And we've got to really stop this fucking reductive reactivity, intellectual reactivity and psycho-emotional reactivity, because we become so much more a part of the problem in truth and disclosure. Epstein is not the deep well, nor is Maxwell. It goes a lot deeper, and there are icons a lot more famous than that are going to be exposed. I said at the time of Harvey Weinstein that Harvey was the decoy. He was simply a decoy thrown under a bus because they wanted to create a flashpoint on the West Coast away from what was happening in DC and Atlanta and the other hotbeds of trafficking, child sex abuse, and Satanism, and keeping the population tearing out the jugular of Harvey Weinstein, like they tried to do with Woody Allen, like they tried to do momentarily with Steven Seagal, who's a fantastic human being, incidentally, and Sly Stallone, both of whom I've known for over 25 years, fantastic human beings, and almost ruined the lives of some of the icons in Hollywood who aren't involved and were never involved in that stuff. But that's how the Satanists roll. They stick together. They know who they are in Hollywood. When people of the world, and I know who they are, and I'm not going to be naming them on this show, but when people of the world realize which icons in the pop industry, in the rock and roll industry, in Hollywood entertainment industry, in academia, and on the screens of our television sets as anchormen and people who are driving the mainstream media narrative, and also the primary hedge fund managers and big bankers masquerading as playboys. When all of that comes out, it will then topple this Ponzi scheme of cult programming that we call government.
You've mentioned a few times the central banking system, which it doesn't get the attention a lot of the time that it deserves, because all of the Australian dollar that we use here, US dollar, it's all issued by the central bank of each country. We have the Reserve Bank of Australia. In the US, that's the Federal Reserve. And we've seen during this coronavirus the push to use plastic cards is the correct way, not use cash. And obviously, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have been a mass disruptor to the centralized banking system. Obviously, governments are racking up huge debts, and printing money, issuing new money is the secret way they can rob us.
Yes.
Instead of just increasing taxes, which is more obvious.
Well, that's correct. So you can't separate economics from social ecology, and you can't separate social ecology from the Gestalt or the Zeitgeist. You can't. There's a direct connection between the consciousness, the field of consciousness, the social ecology, which is reflected in the economics modeling of any country or any culture or any peoples. So it's all interconnected. So yes, we can turn our holonomic focus here momentarily to how the diabolical hand of Satan is intending to also press a master reset button on the global economy and collapse. Which is what the land grab is, the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, a core agenda. But yes, this is also...
I'm still here. I think Sacha froze for a moment.
Oh, very good. You're back. So the key thing for us to recognize is that there is going to be an attempt to introduce universal credit. There is going to be an attempt for government to say, well, we've just rescued you poor sods, from this stealth influenza. Sorry, COVID-19. I forgot. I thought it was a common cold, but no, it's a COVID-19 corona lethal strain. It's so lethal, in fact, that you have to go and have a test to see if you've got it, because you don't show any symptoms. Okay,
so no one's even thinking.
Well, yeah, not any test.
You have to go in your nose.
I'm sorry, I'll correct myself. You have to go and get a test where you get skull raped by a long instrument like this that they dangle around inside the cavity of your brain to get some mucous membrane, when they could just as well take a swab from the inside of your cheek. Well, I wonder why that is. I could speak for hours on bioweaponry. I could speak for hours on the nanobot and the nanotechnology that my own foundation had been involved over many years in finding inside the H1N1 vaccines and so on and so forth over the years. So no, this is all stealth stuff. Anyone wanting to understand how insidious it gets, do yourself a favor and study the Jesuit oath, which was set down many centuries ago and is predictive programming for everything that we're seeing today. To go back to the economy, yes, this is an attempt to press a master reset button so that the same controllers can step in and save the day, to use David Icke's old adage of problem, reaction, solution. That's all we're seeing play out. More shame on us for falling for such a cheap parlor trick.
We had the final US presidential debate this morning, our time, and of course Biden has made no secret that he wants to, well, when he says take more action to prevent the spread of coronavirus, more shutdowns, and he's warned of a dark, cold winter. And obviously, Northern Hemisphere going into winter, we're going into summer, and well, it's obvious to everybody that when it's cold, that's when flu-like viruses circulate, and we're seeing the UK. They've got that tier system, and so they're having a dark winter because their government is imposing lockdowns. But obviously, in 2020, more people have connected with you that more people have found you, including myself. There's obviously a lot more pain to come, not just down here, but particularly in the northern hemisphere as well. You had in 2019 the New Earth Festival. Are you hoping to get another one up soon? Because 2021 might turn out to be a even more chaotic year than this one.
No, 2021 is going to be an amazing year. Project your ideation. Dream wisely in that respect. Project your plasma and your life force and your imagining toward high outcomes, noble expression. That's what you are, what I am, as a living son and daughter of God, to use slightly scriptural language. We are the capacitors of the divine. We decide and determine what world we live in. Okay, thus far, we've been asleep at the fucking wheel, and we've allowed this a monstrous abomination to manifest as the status quo. Well, let's unimagine it, okay? Let's imagine a very beautiful year ahead, which I certainly know is coming. The reason why Joe Black Magician Biden, I say Black Magician, I don't think he's a very good one, but he's certainly involved in the Sabbatean witchery of dream spell. He's a poor man who himself and his son, I sympathize with them more than I castigate them, because these creatures have never been known to themselves. But he's doing, again, predictive programming. He's required to stand there and to say, we're coming in for a long, hard winter, because then it creates a buffer. People psychologically adopt that meme, and it becomes accepted, and we're momentarily afraid to hear it, and then we work around it and go, well, maybe I can just get through it myself with the family. Okay, I've just got to get on with it and put up with it. And that's when you move into acquiescence, just by accepting that kind of bullshit dialectic coming out of that bullshit face of that man. So reject lies and deceptions and chicanery and sophistry and witchery. Reject it where you hear it. Reject it at the front gate. Get thee behind me, Satan. That is what you say and think when you hear that kind of venal bullshit coming out of a Joe Biden on the television screen. On the conversely, you've got the white hat, the other magician, in the guise of Donald J. Trump, who I happen to adore, and you see him saying, COVID, corona, COVID, corona, CNN, you dumb bastards. He said that yesterday live on air. Thank God. There's an authentic human with red blood in his veins calling it out for what it is. And he's saying, no, we're going to bounce back with the strongest economy we've seen in modern history. And indeed, we can. So it's a choice, Tim. That's the point. Let's stop being cult programmed and dream spelled and mind fucked and predictably programmed into memes that are the devise of invisible masters who have a real vested interest in the outcome. Let's instead just ignore the Morrisons, the Andrews, the Bidens of this world, and even the Trumps ultimately. They're all part of a construct of supremacy and control and bedevilment that don't serve the living men and women of the living soil. And so long as you and I hold true to that as a cornerstone of the world that we wish to manifest, that world will manifest. Simple as.
Yeah, you're exactly right, that the new Earth will only come to fruition if humans want it. And in my own city of Melbourne, I've seen more and more wake up in 2020, but still a lot more need to as well. And I think that's a good, I think a good summary to finish on. I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on tonight, Sacha, and so has my audience as well. One of them made the point that I wonder what it would be like if you were invited on the one of our mainstream media networks.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly have a great deal of fun playing something you've never seen on your mainstream, which is an authentic human.
And hopefully sometime soon I can visit where you are and attend a New Earth festival, because yes, as I was saying, that there's so much beauty in the world that we've been and natural beauty that we've been prevented from seeing in 2020. And I've always been the sort of person myself who's always been happier at home. But this is 2020 has been, I want to be out in the future for the rest of my life as much as possible, see the natural world. I won't take it for granted anymore.
Quite so, Tim. Well, I salute you for that and that noble objective, and look forward to welcoming you on the island whenever you can get here. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you. Take care. And that's the show for this special Friday night edition of WilmsFront. Obviously, WilmsFront Friday is in place of Trad Tasman Talk, which normally airs 6 p.m. Melbourne time Fridays. Dewey is taking a bit of time off because not just he was covering the election, he was also a candidate as well for the new Conservative Party, which didn't win a seat in the new New Zealand Parliament. Obviously, Jacinda Ardern, her Labor Party, won an absolute majority, which is absolutely awful. But yes, certainly, as I said to Dewey, you're on the Victorian Dan Andrews path, because it takes 2 terms for socialists to wreck a joint. Now, I'll be taking a bit of, not too much time off, but next WilmsFront show will be next Wednesday evening, same time, 7 p.m. Melbourne time, on all the outlets there. I don't know when Trad Tasman Talk will resume. If it's not next week, then I'll do another Friday night WilmsFront. And then, of course, next Saturday evening, October 31st, Halloween, it is the Queensland state election. There'll be a special WilmsFront live stream. We'll be joined by an ensemble panel. I'm still finalising it, but one confirmed is, of course, Barclay McGain, who I had on WilmsFront previously. Who was of course kicked out of the Liberal National Party of Queensland for being too politically incorrect. So it'll be good catching up with him again, and a few other Queenslanders as well. Yes, Senator Slayer, I will have a costume for Halloween. Though it will be, I think, a spooky Halloween night if Anastasia Palaszczuk or as she's known, the Chook gets back in. It looks like with some restrictions being eased here in Melbourne in the coming days, that Halloween will be able to be celebrated here in Melbourne. Apparently, the Chief Health Officer is going to have some COVID-safe Halloween trick-or-treating directions. That's if he ever stops... if he ever emerges again, Brett Sutton, after being missing in action all week. The meme is that he's taking advice from Hillary Clinton about how to delete emails because his emails contradicted his testimony to the Royal Commission. Oh, sorry, the Board of Inquiry, I should say, into Victoria's hotel quarantine program. So we shall await another Dan decision day on Sunday. Now, I mentioned the presidential debate. The presidential election is on November 3rd, which is US time. We'll start to get the results around midday Australian time on November the 4th. It'll be an Uncuckables special election day / night live stream. Hope to be joined by all the regular Uncuckables panelists, such as David Hiscock, Stephen Wells, and whoever else we have on. It'll be another epic election live stream. We did our first international Uncuckables election live stream with the UK election last year as well. So certainly it's election season here. So far we've seen, the voters of New Zealand, ACT and Northern Territory make all the wrong decisions. We'll see if Queensland and the US are any different. So thank you everyone for watching on this Friday night. I'll see you again for WilmsFront again next Wednesday. So stay safe and stay sane.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows. and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.